The Veil of Tears, Part 6, a new chapter. Lena hadn't planned on staying in Italy for long. She had told herself it was just a temporary escape, a chance to breathe, to heal, to figure out what came next. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. And for the first time in years, she wasn't living for someone else. She rented a small apartment in Florence, a place with rustic brick walls and a tiny balcony covered in vines. Every morning, she walked down to the same cafe, where the old barista, Marco, greeted her with a warm buongiorno and her usual cappuccino. She spent her afternoons wandering through art galleries, getting lost in books, and learning bits of Italian from kind strangers. At night, she wrote. At first, it was just journaling, scribbled thoughts about heartbreak, betrayal, and the weight of letting go. But soon, her words turned into something more. A story. A love story, not about a man, but about a woman finding herself again. One evening, as she sat in a small piazza, sketching out a new idea in her notebook, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're always writing." She looked up and found herself staring into the warm, hazel eyes of a stranger. He was tall, with tousled brown hair and a soft smile. She smiled back, closing her notebook. "It's a habit." He nodded toward the pages. "Are you a writer?" She hesitated. She had never called herself that before. She had spent years defining herself by other things, by being Daniel's fiancée, by being the woman who almost got married. But now, here, in this moment. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The man smiled. "Then I hope you write something beautiful." And as he walked away, Lena realized she already had. Because for the first time, she wasn't just writing her story. She was living it. The Veil of Tears, Part 7, Finding Home. Lena never got the stranger's name that night, but his words lingered. For weeks, she wrote more than she ever had in her life. Her heartbreak, her healing, her journey, they all spilled onto the pages. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It wasn't just about Claire. It was about her. One afternoon, as she sat in her favorite cafe, Marco placed her cappuccino in front of her with a knowing smile. "You have the look of someone who is finishing something important." She laughed softly. "How can you tell?" He gestured toward her notebook. "You always write with your heart. But today, you look like someone who has finally let go." Lena looked down at the words she had just written, the final chapter of her story. A story of heartbreak, yes, but also of resilience, of self-love, of starting over. "I think I have," she admitted. Marco patted her hand. "Then it's time for a new beginning." And for the first time, she knew exactly what that meant. A month later, Lena walked into a small publishing house in Rome, manuscript in hand. She had done her research, found an independent publisher who championed fresh voices. She had doubted herself 100 times, wondering if her story was worth sharing. But she reminded herself, this wasn't just about the past. This was about her future. The editor, a woman with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, flipped through the pages as Lena sat across from her, nerves buzzing in her chest. When she finally looked up, she smiled. "Lena, this is beautiful. Raw, honest, deeply moving. I think the world needs this story." Lena exhaled, a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming relief washing over her. "So, does this mean?" The woman nodded. "We'd love to publish it." Tears pricked Lena's eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of something new. Something hopeful. Because the girl who had once stood at the altar, broken and betrayed, had now found her voice. She had turned her pain into something powerful. She had turned her heartbreak into a story that might just heal someone else. And as she stepped out into the golden streets of Rome, the sun warming her skin, she realized. She wasn't just living a new chapter. She had finally found home. The Veil of Tears, Part 8, Full Circle. The day Lena's book was published, she stood in a quiet bookstore in Florence, staring at her name printed on the cover. It felt surreal. She ran her fingers over the title. The Veil of Tears, a story of love, loss, and becoming whole again. She had written it all, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the moment she chose herself instead of a man who never truly loved her. And now, her words were out in the world, waiting for someone who needed them. She turned the book over, her breath catching as she read the dedication. For the woman who thinks she won't survive the pain. You will. And when you do, you'll find yourself again. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Are you the author? Lena turned to see a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, clutching a copy of the book. Her hands were shaking slightly. I am, Lena said with a warm smile. The girl hesitated, her eyes glistening. I just finished reading this. And I had to find you. Because I just got out of a relationship where I lost myself. And your book, your words, they made me believe I could heal. Lena felt her heart swell. She reached out, squeezing the girl's hand gently. You will heal. I promise. The girl nodded, wiping a tear away before laughing softly. Can I get a picture with you? Lena chuckled. Of course. As they posed together, Marco, the cafe owner who had become like family, clapped his hands from behind the counter. Look at our famous writer. The bookstore erupted in applause and Lena couldn't help but laugh, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had lost so much that day in the wedding hall. But standing here now, surrounded by love, not the kind she had once chased, but the kind she had built for herself, she realized something. She hadn't lost anything at all. She had gained everything. And for the first time in her life, Lena knew. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The Veil of Tears, final chapter, A Love Meant to Be. Months passed and Lena's life continued to bloom in ways she never expected. Her book became a quiet success, reaching women across the world who saw their own heartbreak reflected in her words. Letters poured in, stories of loss, healing, and rediscovery. She read every single one, knowing that, in some way, her pain had found a purpose. But she never could have predicted what happened next. It was a rainy evening in Florence when she found herself back at the small piazza where she had first met the stranger with the warm hazel eyes. She hadn't seen him since that night, but she had never forgotten him. She was sitting under a cafe awning, sipping wine, when a familiar voice cut through the soft hum of the city. You are a writer. She turned, her heart skipping a beat. There he was. The same kind eyes. The same soft smile. But this time, she smiled back without hesitation. I am, she said. And you? Are you always this mysterious? He laughed, stepping closer. Only when I'm waiting for the right moment. She raised an eyebrow. And this is the right moment. He hesitated, then nodded. I think so. They talked for hours, the rain turning to a soft drizzle around them. His name was Adrian. He was an architect, originally from Spain, traveling through Italy for inspiration. He had been in Florence longer than expected, something about the city had made him stay. Something or someone. As the evening stretched on, Lena realized something strange. This wasn't like before. It wasn't the dizzying, all-consuming love she once had with Daniel. It was softer. Steadier. It felt like warmth on a cold day. Like something that had been waiting for her all along. By the time they parted, Adrian brushed a damp curl from her face and smiled. I'd like to see you again, Lena. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she exhaled and smiled. I'd like that too. Because this time, she wasn't chasing love. She was simply letting it find her. And as she walked home through the quiet streets of Florence, she realized. This was not the end of her story. It was just the beautiful beginning. The Veil of Tears, epilogue love, on her own terms. A year later, Lena stood on the terrace of her Florence apartment, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. The sky burned in shades of gold and crimson, the air carrying the scent of fresh rain. She held a copy of her book in one hand, a glass of wine in the other. She had built a new life here. A life filled with morning walks along the Arno River, afternoons lost in writing, and evenings spent in laughter with friends who had become family. And then there was him. Adrian stepped onto the terrace, slipping his arms around her waist, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Lost in thought again, he murmured. She smiled. Always. He chuckled. Let me guess, writing a new ending to your story. Lena leaned back against him, exhaling contentedly. No. For the first time, I don't need to rewrite anything. She had learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It wasn't about rushing toward an altar or clinging to something that wasn't meant to last. Love was steady. Love was kind. Love was what she had finally found, first in herself, and then, when she least expected it, in Adrian. He turned her toward him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I have something for you." She raised an eyebrow as he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. She opened it, eyes widening at the sight of 2 plane tickets. "To Spain?" she asked, looking up at him. Adrian grinned. "You told me once you wanted to see the world. I figured we could start somewhere close." Lena laughed, warmth blooming in her chest. "You want to travel with me?" He tucked a curl behind her ear, his hazel eyes shining. "Lena, I'd go anywhere with you." And for the first time in her life, love didn't feel like something she had to chase. It simply was. She looked at Adrian, at the city that had become her home, at the life she had built from the ashes of heartbreak. And she knew. This was the real happily ever after. The Veil of Tears, epilogue love, on her own terms. A year later, Lena stood on the terrace of her Florence apartment, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. The sky burned in shades of gold and crimson, the air carrying the scent of fresh rain. She held a copy of her book in one hand, a glass of wine in the other. She had built a new life here. A life filled with morning walks along the Arno River, afternoons lost in writing, and evenings spent in laughter with friends who had become family. And then there was him. Adrian stepped onto the terrace, slipping his arms around her waist, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Lost in thought again," he murmured. She smiled. "Always." He chuckled. "Let me guess, writing a new ending to your story." Lena leaned back against him, exhaling contentedly. "No. For the first time, I don't need to rewrite anything." She had learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It wasn't about rushing toward an altar or clinging.